right, welcome everybody to our presentation this afternoon. I know 2 p.m. on the second or third day of the conference.
Just get started.
Yeah, no better pick me up than 45 minutes about data.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. So 2 years ago, if some of you saw or heard when Raul was here, 2 years ago was our first time at NWMET back in Idaho, and we had given a presentation about our first foray into really trying to capture meaningful data with respect to our classroom support services that we provide at Pepperdine University. And some of the context around that is, you know, like many institutions, some sort of coming out of COVID, that whole return to campus back in 2021 that everyone was really excited about. We were the victims of some budget cuts, and so some of that tier 1 support that we were so used to having as far as that frontline classroom support was gone, essentially overnight. And so our audiovisual technologies team was basically all of a sudden responsible for all of this classroom support. And so fortunately, I guess we had a little bit of time to try to figure that out before that, again, quote unquote, return to campus in fall 2021 for us. And so we wanted to use that as an opportunity to try to kind of change how we do things and be more data driven and be more thoughtful with the resources that we have and the time that we have and the energy and effort that we have to spend. And so when we came a couple of years ago, we didn't have that much data to report on. We had kind of one full semester and then kind of like a half semester for the fall, for the spring 2022 semester. And so a lot of what we were showing was sort of, it's cool, it's interesting, but not really anything that we can draw any definitive conclusions from yet. And so kind of like those high school science projects, the answer at the end of our presentation was, we need to do more research, we need more time, we need to kind of look into this more. And so we're really excited to be back here today to kind of give a pretty significant update on our sort of data collection, data journey strategy at Pepperdine University. And so thank you all for being here, and we'll jump into it. So my name is Jared Mukai. I'm one of the senior managers for Pepperdine's IT client services team. And so we're one of those universities that AV is part of IT. We work closely with them, and fortunately we have some really good relationships with them. And so again, we're really fortunate for that. But one of my big responsibilities is to oversee our IT project management group. And so we're also very fortunate to have that, as well as Nick's team here, the audiovisual technologies group. And so I'll let Nick introduce himself.
Hey guys, my name is Nick Maniglia. I'm the manager of the AV Technologies Department. My team is responsible for both the classroom and event support on campus.
So what are we going to do today? What we want to do is get really specific. I think, you know, sometimes you go to a presentation, you go to a conference, and you're really excited about the topic or the subject matter, and then you kind of walk away wondering, like, I just wish there was like a little bit more. There was like a little bit further or deeper we got into that. And so what we really want to do is share some of the specific lessons that we learned, some specific action plans, some specific examples of what we've done and how we've sort of tracked how those changes have affected our ability to support classrooms. And so we want to give some context around that, so just so all of this kind of makes a little bit more sense. And then we'll go into that data. And to kind of preface it, this is real data. And you'll see why that's sort of funny up top is it can look like we made it up because it tells a nice story, but this is the actual data that we've been collecting. I wish I had the talent or the creativity of the time to make up data. But then we'll dive into some of what those insights are, and kind of what those action plans were and what we specifically did. And then we'll want to kind of talk about, well, what next? Like, what about what comes after this? Or where are we going? Where is Pepperdine looking? And of course, we'll spend some time, or save some time at the end to answer any questions you guys may have. And if this conversation goes beyond this 45 minutes, all the better for it. We're happy to continue this conversation.
And so just to provide a little bit of context about the size of our university, we have over 100 AV systems in our classrooms. We run over 2,000 classes per week, and we do this with a team of 5 technicians. And we're able to support, you know, all these classes with such a small amount of technicians because of the data that we're going to be talking about. That's crucial to you know, the success of our operations.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of being data driven is trying to understand the impact that the AV systems are making on the teaching and learning experience. And so we conducted a study a few years ago, and kind of when you look at student tuition, when you look at how much money students are paying to attend this school, to go to these classes, a number that kind of popped out at us is it costs about $1,000 per minute per class for Pepperdine. And so for us, we kind of look at that and say, every minute that a classroom is not working, it's not operating, it's not helping the teaching and learning in that room, we're sort of burning $1,000 a minute there. And so it just kind of provides that impact and how important it is to make sure that we do whatever we can to keep these systems up and running as much as possible. And so when we're talking about collecting data, and we're talking about analyzing data for today's presentation, we're really talking about those service tickets with respect to classroom support. So we're talking professor is about to teach class, so they're in the middle of teaching class, and they're trying to leverage some technology, and the technology isn't working how they perceive it should be working. And so the way at Pepperdine we have it set up is they're instructed, and faculty are conditioned, and I think are used to it by now, but to call a specific phone number that goes directly to our AV technician's office, and then we pick it up. We ask, what's your name? Where are you located? And tell us what's going on. And if we can help them over the phone, we'll do so. And if not, we'll dispatch a technician as quickly as we can to that classroom to help them get resolved as quickly as possible. All of those phone calls, all the hard work that the technicians do, are translated into tickets. And so for the rest of this presentation, you might see things like number of phone calls or something about the number of tickets. And for all intents and purposes, you can think of them as the same thing. Every phone call gets generated into a ticket. The phone call, of course, captures what time they called, who called, how long the call lasted, and then the ticket will capture what was talked about, what was the problem, what was the resolution, all of those things. And so it's really two halves of the whole. What we want to talk about right now is once you have that data, and as an aside, 2 years ago, our focus was mainly on the first part, the collection of data. How do we do that thoughtfully? How do we make sure we collect clean data, useful data? And so today, we want to talk about, once you have it, what do you do with it? And how do you use it to further your efforts or make what you do better? And so the data that we're going to be showing you, of course, starts fall 2021 and runs all the way through our most recent fall semester, so fall 2023. So we're talking 5 full semesters worth of data, so 3 falls and 2 springs. And of course, we're currently in that 3rd spring. And so the first question we can ask is, who's calling us? And it turns out it's not very interesting. And we'll touch on that in a second. And so perhaps a more interesting question is, how often are people calling us? And so one of the things Nick mentioned earlier was the fact that we have about over 100 classrooms, 2,000 classes a week, and with 5 technicians. It might seem like a pretty daunting task. How often are people calling us? Kind of gives us that sense of what that need is and sort of what demand are we facing. And so over the last 5 semesters, the average number of calls per Malibu faculty member, and the AV Technologies team is in charge of our Malibu classrooms. We have a couple of satellite campuses and international campuses, and we have great teams that support those. But the average number of times a Malibu faculty member calls us every semester is a little under 1.5 times, which goes to tell you, not that often. In fact, if you look at the percentage of people who have called us just 1 time in the last 2.5 years, almost half of them. And if you want to bump that up and include the people who have called us twice in 2.5 years, you're over 70%. Yes?
You mentioned Malibu faculty, so I know you have some outlying campus facilities. You're not capturing that information.
No, we're currently working with those satellite teams to try to get them in the good habit of collecting some of that good data. Yes.
How many total faculty?
At the Malibu campus, we run about 800 to 850 faculty members.
But these calls are just from the classroom.
Classroom issues.
They're not calling from their office.
Right. We have a separate, more general IT support line for those types of calls. I can't connect to Wi-Fi, I can't print, so I need help setting up my computer. These are just for, and of course there's a little bit of spillage over to that and we have to help them out, but for the most part, this is just dedicated to, I need help right now because I'm in the middle of a class or I'm just starting class, and we need to get this going. And so this is certainly a case of a small number of people needing a little extra attention rather than a large number of people needing all this attention. And so, one way that this helps us is, of course, identify who those people are, who those few number are, and we can work with them to try to figure out, is it a miscommunication, a misunderstanding, is it perhaps a training thing, or perhaps, as Nick will share in a second, maybe there's actually something there that's causing one particular person a little bit of pain. And so, Nick, can you share a story with us?
Yeah, so for example, we have a professor that teaches in one of our main auditoriums, and it seems like almost every time he teaches, he'll call us and tell us if the audio isn't working. So for a while, we just thought that he just didn't know what he was doing. But after we looked at the data, we realized that he was teaching every Monday morning. Every Monday morning, he'd call us with a question that the audio wasn't working. And we thought about it, and we realized that on Sunday nights, there's a group that comes in, with an audio technician that knows what he's doing, and he messes with the board. And so the next morning, when the teacher goes to use the microphone, the settings are different. It's not working. So now we started going in every Monday morning before class and resetting the board and making sure it's good.
Yeah, and so for us, it was a humbling sort of experience. Sometimes you see someone call over and over again, you keep helping with the same problem over and over again, and you think, what's wrong with this person? But it turns out that sometimes they are justified and it's not their fault. And so it's really only through this process we can kind of uncover what some of those things may be. Another question we can ask ourselves is, of course, when are people calling us? And as Nick kind of alluded to, that can be important. And so here's a graph. Everyone loves graphs and charts. On the x-axis here is week number. So at Pepperdine, we run 16-week semesters. And on the top, or on the y-axis, you can see the number of phone calls that we get. And so this is just for the fall 2021 term. And so again, put yourself back in fall 2021, we have all of these faculty coming back to campus, all the students coming back to campus. We have a team that's never had to support classrooms before, now have to support how many faculty, we don't know. How many people are gonna need help, we don't know. How many AV systems are gonna run into trouble that haven't been used in the last 18 months, we don't know. And so tracking that, again, obviously during that time, this isn't really helpful because you're tracking it, but looking back on it, you can see a fairly obvious behavioral pattern with this data. Right, beginning of the semester, for justifiable reasons, the highest number of phone calls that we received throughout the semester, with a fairly steep drop off, and then maybe if you squint your eyes enough, kind of in the middle of the semester there, maybe some sort of leveling or some sort of equilibrium, with of course the Thanksgiving week, no one on campus, and then a little bit of phone calls that dead week / finals week. In and of itself, good information, but as we were talking 2 years ago, fall semesters aren't necessarily the same exact thing as a spring semester. So maybe there's something different. Maybe this isn't as prescriptive as you may think it will be. And so when you look at that full next spring semester, a little different. In particular, you can see right here, I can't remember what the exact reason was, but that semester we started the first 2 days of the semester remote, and then decided that third day we would start in person. And so the little dip here, as you can see, is likely due to the fact that that was really 3/5 of a full week in person. But then it jumps up to that maximum for the semester. But then you see a similar sort of behavior, right? It's sort of a steep drop off, maybe a little bit of equilibrium or stabilization in the middle, and then carries out to the rest of the semester. And you can see like a spring break here is going to be a little bit of a different sort of dip in a Thanksgiving or holiday break. And again, great. We have one full fall, one full spring. We have one full academic year. Is this prescriptive yet? Maybe, maybe not. Right? What do they say? 1's to the data point, 2 is a coincidence, but 3 becomes a pattern. And so then when we start looking at the fall 2022, our second full fall, third full semester, a very similar behavior, similar shape. With the really only the exception here being this strange anomalous spike here. And so what does that tell us? It tells us that that is an anomaly. It is not the start of a different pattern or the continuation of the existing trend that we're not aware of. We can say that there was some external factor that caused that. In fact, that was a power outage.
I was going to ask, did you identify something?
Yep, exactly. We're able to do that, after the fact. But there was certainly a power outage that dropped a lot of our controllers offline. Obviously, you can't use the system without the controller. Got a lot of phone calls, but we were able to resolve that issue.
I had it here yesterday with the lightning strike, like not power.
There you go. Phones
So
in
they're gonna have a big spike.
Yeah, exactly.
So now it won't be any.
Yeah. And so you can fast forward spring 2023. Again, there seems to be, that sort of same overall behavior, kind of a lot at the beginning, drop off, maybe a little bit of equilibrium or stabilization in the middle, and then sort of a nice kind of tail to the end. 2 points of note here is you can see that for the most part, maybe you have the blue line, then the orange, and then you jump up to the yellow, but that was because of that weird start to the semester. But when you talk about the most number of calls, so to speak, generally speaking, beginning at the early parts of the semester, term over term, they seem to be decreasing as well. And
Did
so
you make any significant technology upgrades in 2021 that created that sort of 90 call spike there at the top?
we did make some changes to our classrooms. In particular, we added cameras and microphones and all of the fun COVID technologies that allow for that, whether we call it hybrid or high flex sort of teaching. So that certainly played a factor into it. But we did the training, we did the communication plan, we did all of that stuff. But to us, it was more of a function of just faculty not having taught in rooms for over a year and a little bit of that. But exactly, I think more importantly, when you look term over term, why is that? Why do the lines seem to translate downward a little bit?
Yeah.
And that could be either faculty getting used to the technology, you have older faculty retiring and newer faculty coming in who may be more technologically savvy, a lot of different reasons. But what is most interesting to us is there seems to be a similar behavior across semester to semester. And you might be wondering what this anomalous spike was, and that was a rogue computer update that went out to all of our classroom computers in like 90 seconds, and every computer started updating itself, and so everyone started calling us about what was going on. And we don't deal with computers, so that was not our fault, but we were happy to help them out and try to get them up and running as quickly as possible. And then not to belabor this, you can see the gray line here is our fall 2023, so this is just last fall. Same sort of behavior, but again, it seems like the worst of it seems to be lessening and lessening, and then similar again sort of trend appearing. And then for what it's worth, here's a teal line. This is our current semester. So of course this tail end here is flat. We haven't gotten there yet, but I don't know. I stare at this thing probably 2 or 3 times a week, and well, first I'm just mesmerized for a while. I don't know about you guys, but I love data. I have a math background. I'm a big nerd in that way. I'm sick. But I just keep wondering, can't this keep going down? You can't, 0 calls is not reasonable. But the data keeps saying it keeps going down and down and down. So maybe we're reaching some sort of global or overall equilibrium point here. But just to give you a sense of where we started 2.5 years ago to where we are today. And this week 11 is literally last week. So we get these updates every week from our network services team that gives us the phone data. And so we can keep this relatively real time. But it brings a tear to your eye, Look where we started, look where we are. Who's to say where we can go? But it's exciting.
Yeah, I don't suppose you'd be shooting for 0.
Right.
That's impossible, plus somebody just might want to talk to somebody.
Right, yeah.
So, the only other thing would be, backup power supplies.
Yep.
And now we're talking an investment at an operational level as opposed to just AV, so
Yep.
it's great that you managed to get to that, probably through some good management, good people training, like you said up front, good technology choices, maybe some attrition.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely all great points. Yes.
Have you had the 5 techs throughout from the 2021?
That's a fantastic question. No, we have not. I don't know about you guys at your institution or organizations. We've had a lot of turnover in the last few years. And so I like to attribute it to our great people, who have been here for not a long time, but seem to have made a lot of great impact while they've been here. So there's a lot of factors that can go into this. We will, of course, try to control what we can control and improve what we can improve, but trying to be aware of all of these differing factors. It's certainly a combination of a lot of things going on. We'll kind of touch on this a little bit.
Are the tech staff or student workers?
Staff. We do have a handful of student workers. We've not been the best at utilizing our student workforce. It seems to be more of a hangout and do your homework hour, but we are very much looking forward to putting them to work a little bit. But for the most part, up to this point, this has been staff. Yeah.
How many student workers?
About half a dozen
Oh.
typically, and that's not saying that each of them is coming in multiple times a week, but I'd say
I'm sorry, what was the question?
about how many student workers that we employ. Yeah, about half a dozen every semester. I'd say when you put all the hours together, it's probably another 2 full-time people. You know, when you kind of aggregate it all.
Earlier you mentioned that you have,
Oh.
so earlier you mentioned you had about 100 classrooms you guys
Mhm.
supported. How about conference rooms? Is that part of your team or something?
Yeah, so that's the other side of audiovisual technologies is all the event support, which conference rooms go under. We have a few shared event spaces on campus that they support, and so being able to track this data and being able to do something about these calls to try to minimize them and just make everybody's lives easier allows them to have more time to focus on those types of events, the actual support during those events, and we'll get into what we're looking forward to accomplishing in the near future, but. Yeah, it just opens up so many more possibilities and opportunities for us.
And maybe I'm getting ahead, but does your data indicate why they call? Like what I need help with
Yep.
X? Oh.
Yeah, we're getting there, absolutely. And so, but before we do, because that's the order of the slides I made, where are people calling us from? And so not super important if you can't read this bottom here, but on the x-axis, we have 18 different buildings that contain classrooms at our Malibu campus. And then on the y-axis, you have call number again. And if you probably look at this for about half a second, you'll realize that there's a particular trend here, that being that these 2 buildings, our top 2 buildings, our communication and business building and our business management building, account for over half of the phone calls that we get. And so what this does, it points us to where to look, right? Kind of like all this talk about generative AI that you get, right? It's not gonna do the work for you. It just helps you get started. Similar, that's how we view data, right? The data doesn't do anything for us, but it helps us get started in terms of where should we be looking. And this is an instance where we think to ourselves, there's something about our communication and business building, maybe physically, maybe infrastructure, maybe something else, something about our business building that's causing this high number of calls. Perhaps it's just faculty who teach communication and business. Maybe it's the technology, or maybe again they're just old buildings. It could be one of a million things. But Nick, why don't you share with us a story about this?
Yeah, so clearly, a lot of our calls are coming from the CCD building. A majority of those calls were about projector issues. They would call and they would say, the projector isn't working, the screen is just blue, which could mean a variety of different things. But after troubleshooting, we realized what was happening was the cable that was going from the switcher to the projector was losing connection with the DTP, and the solution was just to reseat the cables, unplug it, plug it back in. And so we thought, we didn't know why this was happening. We thought maybe the building was just haunted. Then we realized that the CCB is our communication broadcast building, which there's a ton of broadcasting equipment in there, and the cable that we're using was cheap, unshielded cable, and it was causing interference. So we decided to recable all the rooms with nicer shielded cable, and since then we've gotten a significant amount of calls.
And we'll show you what that looks like over time as
So
well.
just to clarify, sorry, was it in each room because is it one controller that's controlling a bunch of rooms, or was it each room they had a specific cable that you found you had to replace in all the rooms?
Yeah, it's each room has that cable.
Wow.
Yeah, we have localized networks in each of our classrooms. Each room has its own processor, own controller, own switcher. We're very interested in looking into AV over IP, but for right now, that's our setup. And so yeah, when you have rooms in the same building exhibiting similar behavior, and yet no other room on campus seems to act that way, there's got to be something about that building. It sort of was a little bit of a slap through forehead, kind of like, why did we not think of this earlier? But all that interference certainly causing some of those issues. Now, why the business centers
not a
doing
branded cable, but shielded versus unshielded.
right, correct. And the caveat, of course, here is not every building has the same number of classrooms, but the CCB is one of the middling classes. I think there's like maybe 16 classrooms in that building. The business management center has, I think, maybe 12 classrooms in that building. So it's not the size of the number that's causing the difference either. Right. Okay, So perhaps, what are people calling about? What are people calling about? And one of the big caveat with this, and we'll kind of address this again when we get to what we're looking at going forward, but one of the big considerations when we're looking at this data is all of this is reliant on a faculty member calling us and self-reporting the issue. And so there are many times when they say the projector is not working, we go over to the classroom and it turns out it's because their laptop was never plugged in the first place. So it's not the projector, it might have been something else. And so that's where the tickets are super helpful for us, and we try our best to recalibrate, right? We'll say, oh, the professor says the projector's not working. In the resolution of the ticket, we'll try to say, you know, it was this other piece of equipment that may have been causing the issue, and then we'll log that. But you can see here, over the last 2.5 years, there's a fair domination of the top 3 pieces of equipment that are causing people issues. And you can see, again, just for thoroughness, the x-axis here is tickets, and you can think of tickets and calls as one and the same. But the PC, each of our classrooms has a dedicated in-room PC. Faculty are free to bring in their own device. We call those laptops, and so PC is the in-room one. The controllers and the cameras, top 3 offenders over the last 2.5 years. And so this is also filtered, as you can see at the top there. We label our tickets based on resolution types. These are just all terms that we come up with. And the two most common resolution types are troubleshooting. That's an instance where there's an actual technology issue, unreasonable that a faculty member would be able to self-diagnose and fix this, so we would dispatch someone or help them over the phone. Or what we call user error tickets, that's just a human error, that's just a perceived issue that really wasn't a technology issue, and we try to separate those two. And so this what question sort of bleeds naturally into the why question. And so that's what we'll get into next, which I'm sure you're all very curious about. This is the same exact chart, but now split out between which, or how many times was it an actual issue versus how many times was it a perceived issue. Yes?
Is wrong number literally somebody called, oh, I'm sorry, it's a wrong number?
Yes, our extension is 4449. Facilities is 4441. DPS, our Department of Public Safety, is 4442. And so we do get wrong numbers sometimes, yes. Or sometimes, I think a couple times someone is called because we were the most recent person on there and they just clicked the wrong button. They were very embarrassed, but that's okay. We were sad to not be able to talk to them. But yes, we log every call, even the ones that are not wrong, the wrong phone numbers, even ones that are talking about the HVAC that we have no control over. I need help printing, we're happy to help transfer them to the right team, but we still log the call and log the ticket. And so when you break this down between how many of these instances were actual problems and how many were perceived problems, you get a slightly different picture. Whereas before we might be really focusing on the PC, the controller, and the camera, and for all, you know, for I guess time in this case, and maybe for more interest, we're just going to focus on the troubleshooting tickets right now, right? Those actual issues. And so when you isolate the troubleshooting tickets, you get a different sort of list of priorities, something to look at first, perhaps. And so you sort of now have like 5 main offenders. You have the cameras, the switchers, the PCs, the controllers, and the projectors, perhaps. And then, you know, wall plates, AV systems, blah, blah, blah. AV system is sort of the catch-all, and you can't figure out exactly what particular piece of equipment it was. And so this helps us, again, it helps tell us where to look. Where should we start? How can we investigate what's really going on here? And so what we'll do is we'll kind of take a look at these top few number of issues here, and Nick has some stories that he can share about exactly what we did, and you can see the impact of what that made over time, which I think is nice. And so we'll start with the cameras here. And Nick, why don't you tell us what happened with the cameras?
So occasionally the cameras would just go offline, they would lose connection for some reason. We tried various troubleshooting. We realized that what was happening was that the NIC adapters we were using weren't really the best quality, so we tried new NIC adapters. The adapters are plugged from the camera to the computer, and after we did that, the camera started working a lot better.
Yeah, you can kind of see where that change happened. Right, fall 2021, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what's going on. People are calling us about cameras. They're calling us about different things. Okay, no big deal. spring 2022 comes along and more people are calling about the cameras. So now we're thinking, is there something going on with the cameras? And of course, it takes some time to identify a pattern and then to try to diagnose what the issue is and then try to figure out what a solution could be and then test that solution and then deploy that solution. So there's certainly a little bit of time lag here, but you can see where that change took place between the spring 2022 and the fall 2022 semesters. And there's a significant difference there. Okay. Now is 14, 17, 16, number of cameras falling offline every semester, you're talking 1 time per week across all of our classrooms. Is that acceptable? Who's to say? Can we get better? I'm sure we can. But there seems to be a steady, sort of, again, prescriptive sort of number that we're looking at. And so, you have the spring 24 semester that we're currently in right now. We're a little past halfway. So if you want to extrapolate a little bit, maybe that turns into 10, 11, 12, something like that. That I think is a fairly comfortable place that we can be. And again, we can either divert some resources and energy to try to solve this more, or maybe we can turn our attention to another piece of equipment that may be causing more problems, like our switchers. Nick?
So our switchers, we're having trouble with the touch panels going offline. And we didn't really know what's happening. So
Well, no, this is exactly what Nick was talking about earlier with that communication and business building, where we noticed that the cables run shielded, and so we swapped those out. And you can see exactly when we made that swap. We actually made that swap in August of last year, so right before our fall 23 semester. And you can see it made a significant difference in the number of times that the switchers were causing issues for people. And again, you want to extrapolate. We've only had 2 instances so far this semester, 11 of the 16 weeks. Maybe it happens 2 more times. Again, is that acceptable? That's not this conversation, but I think it helps us get a sense of what the expectation is. And again, you can either choose to try to solve this more, or we can look somewhere else. And in this case, you can look at the PCs.
So occasionally our PCs would force an update in the middle of the professor's class, which was very distracting for them. So what we implemented was we would do automatic updates earlier in the morning before any classes. So by the time classes started at 8, all the computers would be up to date and we wouldn't get any issues anymore.
Let me ask you about that, because a lot of places will not do that, they'll do it maybe twice a year. These are security things, or why would you just do it when teachers aren't teaching at all? So spring break and then Christmas break kind of thing, and not do it at all anytime.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that is above our pay grades in terms of the policy making.
So that's
on that.
IT maybe.
But that is our, we have a team called DM, Device Management Team, and they're the ones who make the decisions on how often all of our devices get updated, the policies and all of the schedules around that. And I think they do the updates every 2 weeks, I believe. And they have, there's a certain number of computers that are considered, the dog food computers, and then the canary computers, and then I think there's another term because they don't want to use pandemic for the rest of the computers. But they're on like a rolling process. So the dog food computers get the update, week 1, and then week 3 they get the next set of updates. But then the canary computers get the first set of updates, and then the 6th week the pandemic computers get the first update. The dog food computers get the 3rd update. The canary computers get the 2nd one. It sort of rolls like that. And so it's actually, that was because of that big spike that we got from the road computer update. That was a lesson that they learned from that. But in terms of the policy there, yeah, I think it's Wednesday mornings, the computers get updated. And so we have all of the computers set to either restart themselves at like 5 a.m. or if they're turned off, the BIOS will turn them on at 5 a.m. And then every Wednesday is when they go through the updates at like 5:30 a.m. And so the idea is for all of our AM faculty, you don't know what people did yesterday, you don't know if any students came in and messed with the computer, just restart it, just kind of give them a fresh towel to work off of. And it's mitigated a lot of those issues. And you can see kind of where that happened between the spring 23 and fall 23 semesters. So you had
Did the IT group that's kind of controlling the Windows updates, did they use your data to, like, how did they figure out, okay, we need to change, change how the updates are forced out?
Yeah, I mean, I make my recommendations. Whether they're listening to or not is not in my control. But when you have a rogue update like that affect all of the computers in
So
classrooms,
they got it on.
it becomes a priority to figure out what's going on, and I was happy to kind of come in and say, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I think would be the best, kind of work within your policies and things like that to try to come up with the best solution. And so far, it's been effective. Obviously, does the problem go away altogether? No, but again, that's where we make that decision of, do we try to make this better, or do we look somewhere else?
What's your department's position on firmware updates? Take, for example, a switcher or something like that, or touch panels.
Yeah, so we're at Extron University, and so we work with them to just stay in communication about what's coming out, the latest and greatest types of things when firmware updates come out. And I think it was you that made a comment, we do like spring breaks, the summer times, the winter breaks, try to get time in the rooms to do any meaningful work in there. We'll try to just kind of knock all of that stuff out when we can. Yeah.
But it's your position to do that, not read it over first and say, well, maybe we don't need to do this firmware update because everything is working fine. Why would we need it? Unless it's a security issue.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So we'll work with Extron to get the schedule of those updates, and then we have a couple test units in our office. There's kind of like mock racks that we can play with and things like that. So we'll update those and then we'll test them out, see if anything break, anything do anything different, and we'll kind of use that information moving forward. Great.
I was just wondering that term dog food computer. I'm not familiar with that.
Oh yeah, I mean, my understanding is your dog food computers are sort of like the internal test computers that you're gonna push an update out to your community if you're not willing to try to figure out eat your own dog food, figure out what's going on first. So
And canary coal mine kind of thing?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So we have, I think, 3 computers that are considered dog food classroom computers. One we call them Tech Central. They're like a main computer service desk team. One in their office, one in our office, and I think one like an information security office or something like that. And then once everyone gives a thumbs up on those, we have 4 classrooms in real close proximity to our office that we use as the canary computers. And if anyone does have an issue, it's literally like across the hallway that we can go help them out. And then everything else is considered the computers. And so, we can do this all day, right? We can look at individual pieces of equipment and try to figure out exactly what's going on with that piece of equipment, what can we do for that piece of equipment, and then we move on to the next thing. But instead, what we wanted to do is reframe it now. So instead of looking at different pieces of equipment, what if there were underlying commonalities across different pieces of equipment? Like I mentioned earlier, faculty can call about anything, but what's really the root cause of that issue, not necessarily the piece of equipment that was giving them trouble. And so we've kind of diced and sliced the data up in different ways and try to look at things through different perspectives. And I'll kind of cut to the chase here, but we have kind of used a term internally that sort of just everyone just kind of sighs and shakes their head when we say it, and we call it signal flow. And that's simply an issue where the professor is trying to use some sort of input, their own laptop, classroom PC, the Blu-ray player, a dot cam, and for whatever reason, that signal just isn't getting to where it needs to go. It's not getting to the projector, or it's not getting to that classroom display. And of course, it could be anywhere in that path that it's not getting to. And right now, we don't have the ability to figure out exactly where that pressure point is. All we know is it's not getting to the destination. So we call that signal flow, and you can see here, this is just the fall 21 semester. Of all the different types of problems that people had underlying the equipment, signal flow was a pretty big offender. And then you can look at, oh, what happened?
Put a ticket in.
Yeah, and you can look at the spring 22. Again, 1 is a data point, 2 is a coincidence, but 3 becomes a pattern. Fall 22, spring 23, fall 23, and so far, where we're at with spring 24. And so this was kind of my joke earlier. This is actual real data. We did not make any of this up. And to have one underlying issue be so predominant across every piece of AV equipment in every classroom that we have at our Malibu campus blows my mind. One, that there's such a dominant culprit, but two, that we can't seem to figure out what the heck it is and how to fix it. And so that brings us to what comes next, right? All this data is great. Of course, we'll keep collecting data. We'll keep looking at it. We'll keep slicing and dicing and trying to find new ways to look at things and get new perspectives and come up with new solutions and implement those solutions. And then the cycle repeats itself as we collect more data on those solutions. But where are we trying to go from here? And so for us, the main piece as far as our classroom support goes is really to try to figure out what the heck is going on with this signal flow issue. Is it something like we experience our communication and business building, where it's perhaps some not high quality cabling that could be the culprit? Is it something else? Is it a combination of things that somehow are sort of rearing their heads in a similar fashion? And so sort of putting a pin in the signal flow issue, Nick and I have been talking about kind of where the team can start looking for those potential solutions. And so we have been internally using the phrase research and design as sort of anything that captures that proactive sense of what we can do as a team to make the teaching and learning experience better in our classrooms. Of course, if you want to think of the support as like the reactive side, right? We don't know there's a problem until someone calls us. We don't know that you need help until you let us know. Research and design would focus on the proactive things, meeting with new vendors, going to conferences and meeting new people and trying to explore what other people are feeling and thinking and what we can do to share knowledge, researching new technologies and seeing if new solutions can be implemented to solve some of our existing problems. And Nick can speak to some of these more specific ones here.
Sure, we also want to start implementing Global Viewer, which is an external software that will allow us to remotely control and monitor all of the equipment in classrooms. We also want to start researching AV over IP, because it's something that we are interested in. Also cloud-based solutions as well.
Yeah, and I just want to make one comment on the Global Viewer. We've had this Global Viewer server in our server room for I think like a decade, and our rooms are on Global Viewer. We're just not really utilizing the power of it. We can see them, we can't really do anything with them, and it's not collecting data for us, which I know, shocking. But that's something we really want to make an effort to do. And like I mentioned earlier, part of the limitation with the data that we do have is it's all reliant on the faculty telling us, right? So there's a problem, maybe not. A human then has to call us and tell us what that problem is, then we have to go investigate, so on and so forth. Having Global Viewer in a way is an ability to have the AV system tell you directly that there's a problem. And so it kind of gives you that other half of the equation where we can now get a full kind of holistic picture on the health of our AV system, status of our AV system, and specifically what's going on. And through Global Viewer, our hope is to be able to identify where in the signal path the signal's not reaching. And so again, if there's a trend or a pattern or something there, we'll be able to isolate and identify it. But anyway, I think our time is almost up. And so thank you again for all being here, for listening to us talk about numbers and graphs and charts. Are there any questions that we can answer right now?
Do you track time to fix, like how many calls were able to be fixed over the phone versus a tech role versus an actual problem that had to be addressed later?
Yeah, so we do track time, not super, what's the word, accurately. I mean, we track it in terms of like when the ticket was opened, which is generally around when the call comes in, and then when the ticket was closed, which is generally around when the issue was resolved. And so that can be, a few minutes, that can be a few hours, that could be a few days or weeks if it's a bigger issue that needs to be solved. But of course, sometimes you get a call and then you get a call right after that, and you forgot to make the first ticket. So there's a little bit of nuance there. But for the most part, we can track, generally speaking, how quickly we can resolve issues. And then we also log how the issue was resolved, over the phone or in person. And I imagine when we get Global Viewer up, remotely would probably be another avenue for that as well. Great question.
Are you going to try to roll out Global Viewer at one building at a time, or how are you looking at it?
It's a great question. I think the thoughtful, methodical approach would be to do one building at a time. Our goal is to try to do all of our Malibu classrooms over the summer in a 3-month period. And so I'm sure we'll start with one building and sort of just make sure that works before we do all the other ones. But sort of yes and no. We'll do that sort of in a micro way, but we are trying to look to do all of them in a fairly short amount.
Is it not ready to go right now? You couldn't just spin it up and?
No, so it is spun up. Everything's connected already. Sorry, when I mean get Global up and running, we mean to, on the configuration files themselves, to add the monitors and the drivers and all the things that allow the data collection part of it.
Sure.
Yeah, right now we can see everything, we can turn things on and off, but it's just not collecting anything. So I would love to know, for example, in certain rooms, like how often is the projector actually turned on?
That's a
We
good
know.
point.
Or one of my favorites is the wall plates that you have in some rooms. Our faculty love to say that they always use wall plates. I don't think anyone uses a wall plate. I would love to know definitively, like no one's actually connecting to that thing ever. Everyone's
They're
just
using the in-room computer is what you're saying mostly.
What's that?
They're using the in-room computers.
Right. Or the way we have it set up is, there's a wall plate right here. The way we have it set up is we give faculty 2 points of connection. And so there's typically going to be a wall plate somewhere in the middle of the room, but then there's always what we call local connection at the desk or the table or the podium or whatever it is. And so our thinking is that either faculty are using the in-room PC or they're just connecting at the podium themselves. They're not kind of like walking over at the ancillary table, putting it down or connecting to the wall plate or anything like that. Of course, we ask about it, or we threaten to take it away, and of course, 3 people are like, "Oh my God, don't do that." But they really represented it.
About wireless from laptops, or any of that in classrooms or no?
We tested that. We piloted that before COVID. I think there were 2 rooms at our business building, and then a couple rooms at for a couple different divisions. We put Exelon ShareLink boxes in those rooms. No one used them. We had training sessions. We were like, "It's so exciting." And I was like, "Oh, this is great." All I got, there's a little bit of not a learning curve, but like you got to get it set up. You got to download the app. You got to learn how to put the 4-digit code in there. You got to learn what an IP address is. And everyone was excited, but then no one used it. In fact, we found one box in one of the rooms at our business building. We only knew that no one was using it because we went in there and it doesn't work. Like you can't connect to it. There's like a big error message that pops up, and surely someone would have called us if they were using it. And we're like, "This has been here for like 4 years." Any other questions? Well, fantastic. Thank you again, everyone, for coming, for being with us.